afternoon, everyone. Thanks, and please welcome the esteemed panelists over here, joining us to understand about how to make network smarter, and are we making it smarter, and where are we at this stage? So already we have our smartphones in our pocket, which are already very smart, right? And it's evolving. But what about networks? So I would like to start this discussion with, we have a really good panel mix of operators, equipment vendors, as well as infrastructure vendors. So I would like to ask, my first question would be, is a very basic question, is what are the key technologies which we are looking at to implement to make the network smarter? And is it a preparation for 5G network, or we are still preparing for the strong foundation before the 5G network, as you mentioned, 4G plus? So if you can start with, and again, go around.
I think smart is, again, which is very loosely used word. I think, so let me take one connotation of smart, which is automated. Because we have been traditionally doing things in a very manual way. Even if we take a simple thing as provisioning, let's say provisioning 100 Mbps from Bombay to Calcutta, if in today's world it is done in a very manual way, there could be many problems which you may interface. But if you automate the whole provisioning system, and you can provision just point A and point B, and it gets provisioned and the capacities get abstracted, we can then do this faster, and we can do that, you can say, in an error-free way. Similarly, network troubleshooting, if you do the common way of seeing alarms, critical alarm, and then doing some action about it, if we know this particular alarm is handled by giving a reset to this or changing this parameter to this, why can't we automate it and make the network smart so that the network doesn't have to have some human being look at the alarm and take that action it can do by itself. So I think similarly, can we use machine learning and artificial intelligence to predict a fault? We can predict a fault. They are all statistically linked, and if we put a lot of data, then we can predict a fault. I think if we put all these are all bricks in the wall to make a smart network. In my view, this is the thing we are doing in ETTeL to make a network which is error-free, and it is more proactive, and we can predict faults rather than letting it happen and then fix it.
So what are the technologies you are using to implement those, and how far we are at in terms of ETTeL in deploying those technologies?
I think it finally comes down to how much you automate in your NOC side. I think, again, in that, if you have infrastructure which impacts the site availability or service availability. You have transport, you have radio, of course, you have core, you have application, you have things which happen outside. A few days back, we heard there was a disruption in service of one of the big OTTs. That is impacting your customer, and he's calling your call center that I have this disruption, what do you do about it? So eventually, this whole thing is really orchestrated across all the way from your device to the application. Right. So if you can bring it all together and make some kind of, we call it correlations in a normal term, you can correlate and it can pop out the root cause. And not everybody goes and solves it. The root cause guy goes and solves it, others are informed. This is what we are doing. Then we are doing a lot of automation on use cases. Like very simple use cases everybody talks are like sleeping cell. Can you identify a sleeping cell? And can you reset it? Now we are working on it. Can we predict that the cell will go to sleeping cell, and I can do the action before it goes sleeping cell? So these are many use cases which we have, which we do to make our intelligent networks or smart networks in your parlance. And I think this is what we, and there is no one answer, there is no one solution. Yeah. I think it is, you face a challenge, you attack it more from a technology and automation perspective rather than from a manual intervention perspective. You'll be able to build smarter networks.
Great, thank you. Vishant?
I think everything that Randeep has said, I agree with. But in terms of the technologies that we are putting in to make our networks much more elastic, which is to make sure that they are real-time responsive. So when we built our NOC, a centralized NOC, super NOC as we called it about 8 years ago, the latest technology at that time was based on correlation engines. So it was automatic correlation of a lot of alarms that got filtered out, and only the relevant alarms got activated on. That was based on a certain level of correlation on events. About 2 years ago, we started to put in much more RPAs, robotic process automation. Now the next generation, what we are moving into is really machine learning and deep machine learning, whereby we are able to actually put in a lot of the artificial intelligence into our NOC and analyze the data and take actions to respond to events without any sort of a manual intervention. So that is probably the same journey that you see going across multiple industries. We as telco, I think, have been actually a little bit behind, and we need to catch up. So use of artificial intelligence, for the lack of a better word, I don't think it's a very accurate word, but I like machine learning better. But machine learning, deep learning, I think is going to come in the networks in a big, big way. Okay? Whether it is planning, whether it is operations, whether it is even design. So that will go across the whole chain. I think the other thing is, in terms of the orchestration layer, as we cloudify our core networks, and there will be a bigger use of hybrid clouds, even in telcos. So use of a public as well as a private cloud. So you need to develop the right orchestration engine on there to manage all of these, compute capabilities in a real-time basis. So I think that orchestration is the next kind of a big technology thing that we as telcos need to adopt. And then I think one of the key issues that we're going to have to grapple with is also, if we do end up creating a general purpose cloud, which is running both workloads from network or from IT, then the demands are different. So then you need to really build smart NICs or intelligent adapters for processors. So I think that's the next generation. Now you're going very deep into the compute part of the platform as well. So all of those are the kind of next generation technologies that are coming and that we in Vodafone are focused on.
So this is already happening in the 4G era, right? So it's not just is being done for future networks, but for existing networks.
This is for existing networks. Everything I talk about is about reality.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah. So Radhe, from Huawei perspective, how are you helping operators to achieve this cloudification journey as well as adding more intelligence to the network across from RAN to core?
So basically, from Huawei perspective, in terms of smart technologies, we are mainly focusing on 4 domains. The first one is spectrum efficiency. Then of course, automation, Randeep Vishan talked about it. Then the next is quality. And the last but not the least is energy efficiency. Actually, since last few years, we had been starting to focus on spectrum efficiency, given that spectrum is the largest input cost to the operator. So we innovated a solution which enabled dynamic sharing of spectrum across technologies. As a result, we could do LTE technology while maintaining the concurrency of legacy technologies. So we are doing it since last more than 2 years. And of course, we are also introducing, as you would have heard in the first session also, and in second session during the keynote of Vishant and Randeep, that we are introducing Massive MIMO also, which is basically taking the spectrum efficiency by leaps ahead compared to traditional solution. What I additionally want to talk about spectrum efficiency is that now we have started to introduce AI element into the spectrum efficiency solution. So we are making Massive MIMO smart. And we are doing several technologies like Massive MIMO pattern optimization. So Massive MIMO will see the user and traffic distribution and will change the pattern accordingly, dynamically. The other thing, in the morning session, we heard about super band. So I would like to talk about that also. So we are trying to bridge the gap between the 4G and 5G. And how do we do that? So we take all the spectrum of operator, combine them, and use it as a super band, as a large channel bandwidth. And how do we do that? It makes use of carrier aggregation capability. But in a traditional sense, when a CAUE, carrier aggregation UE, will do the measurement and report back to the network, and by the time carrier aggregation is activated, it takes some finite amount of time. And the UE, if it is mobile, it would have moved out of co-coverage area by then. So what we do is we create virtual grid out of base station, which is basically a set of signatures. And based on that, base station can detect that the UE is in CA area and can dynamically activate CA. So the activation time is few milliseconds. So the whole idea is to bring 5G-like experience in 4G. That's about spectrum efficiency, and indeed, whenever we do something about spectrum efficiency, it improves quality also. And I would also like to talk about energy efficiency, given that the power consumption is definitely a big challenge, and we have recently started to work on energy efficiency aspect. And again, here we introduce AI to do the overall modeling. The good thing about today's network is that the networks are multi-layer, multi-band network. And if we look at some large city, we witness that about 40% sites are carrying 80% of the traffic, while remaining 60% sites are carrying only 20% traffic. So using AI, we can actually change layer parameter, switch off some layer during lean hours and save energy. And that's one of the key directions that we are working on right now.
Talking about efficiencies, power efficiencies, actually I would like to jump to Manoj, and since it comes from Indus Towers, so can you talk about from infrastructure, passive infrastructure point of view, as we discussed before during lunch, that power consumption is the biggest bottleneck right now in terms of cost. So can you talk about it more?
So yeah, so before I come to the challenge part, let me share the infrastructure role in supporting the 5G being deployed by the operators. So as we had been doing in the past also, and this, we as Indus Tower is a kind of L&Ts in the world or power grids in the world. We have a capability to deliver roughly 3 lakhs projects per year, means almost a project every 100 seconds. And probably this will be more demanding in time to come when our operators are rolling out this 5G infrastructure very aggressively. Two very important roles which infrastructure player has to play in 5G rollout is first in the product. Because in 5G, the infrastructure will be more closer to the consumption point, unlike to the towers which was a kilometer away. It means it is more denser, more sleeker, and more capable. So that way we had been innovating and we have been providing solutions and the products to our operators to come and have a plug-and-play type of situation. And the second bit of the thing which infrastructure player has to play is the capacity. When I say capacity, not only in rolling out the 5G, we all have seen that phasing out the technology is also a task. How fast we can phase out the infrastructure at site of legacy or redundant technologies, making a spare capacity and the space to accommodate the newer technologies is a task in hand. So that also we had been doing in past and probably more aggressively we have to do. And the third thing, what all this 5G will do, 5G is ultimately towards a use cases. And what Randeep said in his speech, I was actually listening, that monetizing and developing a monetizable use cases of 5G is a task in hand. And where a very important role which infrastructure players can do, which probably Vishant also said, that automation. So we definitely front end in running those use cases at our infrastructure by automating all those sensors, etc., so that these 5G becomes a monetizable use cases for my customers and make the return on investment. That's the role infrastructure players has to play. Coming back to your challenge part, yes. While we deliver all this, we have a challenge in hand. Our telecommunication fraternity sitting here probably must be knowing this, but for the sake of repetition, what I say today, we are a highly energy intensive, and Radhe was also touching upon energy efficiency. While this industry is working, striving very hard towards bringing best-in-class efficiency, but one of the foremost things which is actually hitting us hard, we are paying the highest tariff in the country. We are not paying at the industry tariff. We are paying at the shops and establishment tariff. Though we have made several representations, but still we are yet to get the recognition as an industry. So we pay as a commercial tariff. So whatever we do in terms of, you can say, efficiency improvement, ultimately it goes into the vein and by paying a highest tariff and then looking toward the lowest cost telephony. This is the two irony which need to be plugged. So that is the struggle which we are running with. Though we had got success in past in 1 or 2 states to get categorized as industrial tariff, but that also got reversed. As on today, there is not even a single state in the country where we have been recognized as an industrial tariff. That's the challenge we are facing.
Great, thank you. So coming to Rajan, since he has been the industry observer, working with operators closely, and has a really good view of the entire landscape. So what are your thoughts on the pace of technology deployment right now? Is it good enough, or is it at a good pace? And what are the benefits it will bring to the overall ecosystem?
Thank you. I think when the Apple CEO took a look at what was happening in India, he said this is an instance of the fastest penetration of 4G that he's seen anywhere in the world. And was amazed at the pace at which we had begun to start adopting not only 4G, but now obviously looking into the next generation, which is 5G. So, and I was talking to Mr. Vora, and he was saying is that, you know, some of the case studies that we have here are really fit for global consumption in terms of what we do so much with so little and yet achieve so much. All right, I think this is just phenomenal. But when you look in terms of what are the component pieces, sort of offering my perspective on the network aspects of it from, say, the consumer, one of the things that we've constantly been harping about is that if we don't fix our revenue model, you know, you can do anything you want on the network side, but if you don't fix that, the resources are not going to be there. And so I think one of the things that we're seeing is that convergence is now on steroids. And what that means is that increasingly, more and more industries are choosing to piggyback on the one network we have in this country, which is our mobile networks. So what does that mean? And I think you know, Randeep and others have pointed to the fact that we have so reconfigured our networks that it's becoming increasingly flat, and we have come to the point where our networks are really a platform. Yeah. And so if we are moving into the direction of where our networks have become flat platforms, then what is critical is the ability of all of these industries that can now plug and play into this platform. And what that requires is for us as an industry to start paying very close attention to both standards and APIs. Because without the development of standards and APIs, this whole concept of a platform is going to have its friction point. So I think we need to, as an industry, begin to start focusing on that, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to drive the revenue streams that we are promising, and we've been talking about that. And then finally, when you look at this structure that we're talking about in terms of this, and looking at the revenue streams, we have got to ask ourselves the question, when we are customer-centric, increasingly the B2B side is becoming more and more important. And when we look at the B2B side, and when we looked at Barcelona, we saw all of these use cases on the B2B side. We as operators have got to learn how to play in increasing parts of the supply chain. Sure. So it's not clear. I mean, today we play in logistics, we play in fleet management, we play in autonomous cars, we play in warehousing, and all of these are increasingly silos that are part and parcel of the value chain. Yeah. And so we have to learn how to be able to play in this vertical. We're no longer a vertical, we're more of a horizontal play in terms of this platform concept. And so our sales processes are now going to have to be aligned in terms of more of this horizontal way, in terms to mine the revenue streams that are going to be able to support the types of investments that we're talking about. And then finally, what the point I want to highlight is that we keep on talking until we're blue in the face that data is the new revenue, but we continue to balkanize our revenue streams. And so we're going to have to look at structured, unstructured data, how we extract that, put it on platforms that can be extracted and can be leveraged by all of these folks, because they find all of this information and data that is being generated from all of these multiple silos in our networks of immense use. So obviously there is a regulatory component, but we've got to be able to say, how do we extract all this data from all of these and from all of the folks who ultimately will play on our platform, put it in an aggregated fashion that becomes extremely valuable and can get monetized. This is an opportunity that we can't miss. And so when we start looking at this network slicing and all of these things that our good CTO friends talk about, ultimately that's the payload.
Absolutely. I think you make a very good point on network being a platform, though network operators won't be able to charge the Apple tax for the platform. But I would say the 3G, 4G has been more about personal transformation, but as we move to 5G or advanced 4G, it is more about business and social transformation with the new use cases, as you mentioned, B2B, the different silos. So my question would be, how are we placed in terms of attacking those use cases and applications and drive newer monetization. So it could be use case specific, or it could be monetizing the data behind it. So how are we placed? And when can we see operators actually making money out of those verticals than phones?
Let me have a go at it. First of all, it is not attacking, it is working together, I would believe. Yeah. So I think this B2B space is about working together. The industry you talk about, and you have to work together, and then use the collaboration between a telecom provider, which brings intelligence, connectivity, to the industry, and industry is able to use all that and become more efficient. Some of the traditional use cases are already working in our B2B or enterprise space, where you go to whether a big industry and give him, you can say, a data center kind of space, or a SME and a mini SME, and you give them something like connectivity, security, a lot of services on the cloud, software licenses on the cloud, which otherwise they may not be able to build, and give them a lot of assurance and stuff like that, which you can give, and they will work. So I think this is the traditional way of B2B working in a connectivity domain. What 5G gives us possibility of transforming that industry, where I think now, I again repeat the point I made here, is now we have to bring those industry partnerships where telecom industry, telco operators and our suppliers work with that specific domain. We talked about Barcelona, they were talking about ports, where how the whole port can be automated using a very low latency. It could be private, it could be public 5G network, but it can be automated. All the cranes could be automated. You could use drones to use security and find out what is fixing. So this is really transforming them the way they work. As of now, they are not having this visibility of what this low latency, high speed connectivity can give them.
Transformation is
yes. So I think some of the industries are still stuck with a traditional way of working things, and this is where these partnerships needs to be created. And I believe a lot of enablement can be helped through government engaged partnerships, and a lot of could be purely between enterprise to enterprise engagement. And I think these partnerships will really define Digital India, in my view, because then a lot of our industries will be much more efficient and bring maybe products and services before the world, and which can give us a global platform to do.
Agreed.
Coming on monetizing, I think monetizing, one is the way the OTTs monetize for a advertisement kind of thing, but a lot of monetizing can be done in using that aggregated data for traffic control, for example, and you work on making smart cities, for example, to make secure cities, for example. So I think these are the levels which now we should start going. Telcos should start seeing themselves not as a connectivity provider, but a digital enabler, I would say. And we should be using these more in partnerships with different government agencies and enterprise industries to give. I think there is a huge opportunity where we are going to work together to contribute here.
Yes, absolutely. Do you have any thoughts on where we are at, or where Vodafone is at?
I would say that I would fully agree with the statement that telco is not a vertical, it's a horizontal industry now. And I think it will be more so going forward. It will be the foundational industry for pretty much every other industry in the country. So if that's what we are, then I think the expectations from us are going to be different. Yeah. What are the obligations we have towards the society, towards the customers, as a consequence of that? As well as how do you then create a differentiator so you can market your network as being a better platform than a competing platform. That's a little different way of looking at the network than traditionally we have looked at networks. I think that networks have largely not been looked at differentiators in this business in the past. But as you move into this world where you are actually selling capabilities, let me just pause there and then back up for a minute. We used to have in Vodafone what we called like a 4C strategy. Customer at the heart, coverage, capacity, and cost. Leadership, trying to get leadership in all those domains. We recently added a 5th C, which is capability.
Which is?
Capability.
Capability.
The kind of capabilities you create in your network and how you then expose it to the outside world so you can monetize it. And that depends on the kind of hooks you create in your platform, which is your network. And that's where a lot of differentiation in future will come from. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it will happen over the next span of next several years. And it is very important that the architectural choices we are putting in, the platforms we are putting in, will let us create that differentiation so that our capabilities are valued more than another competing network. And I think every telco operator is going to have to go through those choices. The more you choose a very standardized solution, the lesser the differentiation, because it's easily available. Now, in the telco world, in the traditional network world, this is very, very different, very new. This is like heresy. Yeah, the success of this industry is built on the fact that everything was standardized and we used to work from the standards. IT industry has had a little more experience of this. So I think we're going to have to, as network planners, designers, builders, we're going to have to think a bit more like the way IT guys used to. And that's how we're going to have to architect and build our networks, as well as put in the administrative platforms so that our capabilities are creating larger value for our enterprise clients or even consumer clients. And therefore, there is a bit of a higher margin we can generate for the business. So I think that's very important shift in the mindset.
So, Radhe, just talking about this topic on use cases and monetization and what are the key applications across verticals. So, since you come from Huawei and you also interact with your counterpoints in China and other markets where some operators are already ahead in terms of deployment of these particular applications. So do you have any learnings you can share with us on how, or you in your talks with different operators as well?
Sure. So first of all, if we look at the famous ITU triangle of 5G, we do see three family of use cases: EMBB, URLLC, and MMTC. And in the beginning, initially, all operators globally, they are focusing on EMBB. And actually, they have split EMBB into two sub-use cases. One is fixed wireless access, another is the actual EMBB. Now, fixed wireless access, that can be complementing FTTH because 5G is very powerful. So it can provide very good, strong home broadband, enterprise broadband type of services. And when it comes to EMBB, it will support the evolution of existing video services. For example, today we can enjoy a 720p or HD video in a LTE network. And then in 5G, the target would be to basically enjoy 2K, 4K, and even beyond. And that kind of video would basically require huge data rate, and that will be supported by 5G network. Now, these are two key set of use cases that operators are targeting now. Another key aspect that I want to also share is the fact that MMTC will, in 5G, when we talk about MMTC, there is the two concepts. One is low power wide area, and another is a broadband MMTC. It is now already decided that low power wide area for this 5G, 3GPP will not develop new radio interface. NB-IoT will be evolved. So operators are focusing on NB-IoT, not only globally, I'm sure in India also our customers are focusing heavily on NB-IoT, developing use cases. So NB-IoT would be a starting point for 5G MMTC, which are like non-critical IoT use cases. And in this kind of scenario, I would think that smart city is giving us a bundle of use cases. So platform plus ecosystem approach could be a very good approach to develop use cases and ecosystem partners and go to the market. Definitely, it is more difficult than a traditional B2C type of scenario that we witness for mobile data. And last but not the least comes is URLLC, which is the toughest piece of 5G, I would say. And this piece require architectural transformation. And not only that, given the services are ultra reliable, low latency, they are critical services. They require policy, regulations, etc. And this is where I think most of the countries, they are doing only pilot at this stage. It will probably take more time and much more investment on the network to do architectural transformation, to do URLLC type of services. So those services will be country specific as and when they come.
So it's a release 16.
Exactly, yeah.
And
release 16
low
and beyond.
latency.
Yeah.
So in terms of infrastructure, right? So what do you see any different deployments in terms of different use cases or verticals? like maybe for private. I can come back to you, Rajan, again.
Thank you. So just before we come to how can we enable and support the use cases, there are two things probably which we are focusing. A, that we have seen the more focus towards sharing. Sharing, when I say that, sharing of mast or tower. So the way we are expanding is we have to increase our sharing. Sharing means we have to expand sharing from tower to fiber, fiber to other infrastructure like backend talks, etc. So whatever we have, that has to go into the sharing mode so that we can actually enable the low cost, you can say, use cases and increasing the viability. So that way we are focusing. And another way of sharing, which the way we are doing is allowing and enabling the use cases beyond telecom. When I say beyond telecom, what does that mean for? So we are developing and providing the infrastructure which is capable to provide many more utilities inbuilt into it, like smart charging, smart city surveillance, smart parking, etc., etc. So the moment these use cases are enabled for much more applications, then it is the next level of sharing. And this is actually enabling the low cost, you can say, use case.
More scale.
Yeah. So that's the way we are doing. And then in turn, we are actually bringing the sharing to the next level, which we have not seen in the past.
So Rajan, then talking about operators as the platform model, very horizontal. So what are your views in terms of enabling all these technologies? You still need a completely new mindset, as you said, B2B mindset and thinking more about enterprises. But at the same time, you also need a lot of skill sets across, right? Not only for deployment, as Vishan said, for next generation networks, adding more machine learning capabilities, you still need a lot of engineers which are capable of doing that. So are we at a stage where you're seeing the skill set level is also evolving at the same time?
So there's clearly a lag in terms of their required skill sets. I mean, if you look at our operators, what they are hiring and what is available, there's a big mismatch, right? So we talk about retraining, reskilling, and unfortunately, except for a handful of our key universities, what comes out of our engineering colleges, consistently we talk about having to almost give them another year's worth of training in-house before we can get them up to spec. So clearly, there is a big gap in terms of what's coming out of our institutions that are skill-ready. We have real pockets of extreme intelligence and capability and all of that. And of course, that only drives up the wages for those folks who are in that high demand area, right? And then the rest kind of have to limp along and then get retrained, reskilled. But this whole issue that we also need to look at in terms of the approach, in terms of the interfaces that we talk about disruption. Increasingly, I ask the question, why don't we put our customers at the center of the experience? And what do I mean by that? Why can't our customers themselves go real time, log on, and say, here's the rate plan I want. Here's the speed I want. Here's the applications I want right now for the next 1 or 2 days. Instead of me having to call up customer care, hope I can get through, wait till somebody decides to give me and then tells me that I've got to have a 24-hour wait before my bill cycle can be reset, right? And so I think if you're talking about disruption, if you're talking about this, and we're talking about being customer-centric, you've got to be able to put the center, you've got to move ultimately to the point where you put this customer, be it business to B or C2C or whatever, B2C, and say, why can't they do all of this stuff? And so hopefully all the stuff that we're talking about, virtualization and flexibility and all of this, ultimately gets to the point, customer sits at his or her desk and drives the whole network based on their needs and what they want at that period of time, right?
Which end you would add?
Yeah, so I think Rajan just made a point that which kind of proved my point about the convergence between network and IT.
Yeah.
If we want to create this capability that you just spoke about, then think about what needs to work in a real-time basis with the network. Yeah, it's your billing system, it's your provisioning system, and then you probably want to see what the usage on your utilization on your network at that particular time, in that particular spot, what it is, so you can price it accordingly, right? So that requires everything to work seamlessly. That's coming, Rajan, you will see that. But I think it's going to take a little bit of work. It's going to take a little bit of time. That's exactly what we are building for.
Let me comment on it a little bit. Very interesting point. I think two separate points you made. One was self-care. I think this is where the new generation is. If you talk about them, they do not want to call a call center. I mean, I have a 22-year-old son. You force him that you are not able to get this service. Why don't you call them? They don't call. They email, they send them inbox, but they don't call. So I think eventually if we have to service that generation, it has to be self-care. And we are doing a lot of work about our Airtel app, how we can make the person do everything what he wants to do on his app, whether subscribe or unsubscribe or even lodge a complaint if he has. That is one. But I think this is where all service providers have to go. You can't have people calling and then going through many screens to fix somebody's problem. I think the more important point, Rajan, which you made, which really touched me, is the new generation's readiness about supporting what is happening next. There was a very interesting keynote in Barcelona where one of the companies got 4 kids of 11 years to 14 years to speak about, because they said the 5G is being made for our generation, so we need to know what this technology you are making. And so when we now, in Airtel, we have a program, we call it Young Leaders or Young Technical Leaders. One thing which is very common across all the engineers, young engineers in YTL scheme we get, they are not conformist. They are not afraid and they don't want to follow the standard way of working. They are very entrepreneurial in their approach. So they want to challenge that, why are you doing like this? Why can't it be done like this? I think this is great. So my compliments to the education system. They are generating this entrepreneurial spirit in them that they challenge. That is why if you see there are small entrepreneurs who create wonderful applications or services. But I still feel that at some level the enablement of them for having those tools, whether it is software coding tools, whether it is thinking tools, whether it is approaching tools, if that somehow comes into our education system, whichever line of education, that generation will be very much prepared to actually build upon the digital India we are talking about, which is more technology-led and giving 5G and giving some services. I think that is another angle where we should see how industry and education can partnership to prepare the next generation to take this wave to probably even a higher high. So I think it's a very good point. I think where as a one telecom industry, we can think about what we can do in partnership with our education system of preparing that generation to take this journey to the next level.
So, just to, he mentioned Mobile World Congress and this forum of 16, 17-year-old CEOs of all their own companies. And they did a survey, by the way, and they asked these kids, 18, 19, 11 teenagers, and they said, one of the questions, who do you think is going to look after your parents? 63% said robots.
No, but I don't think it is funny. It is true. In aging populations, like aging Japanese population or something, this is true. The person would be taken care of by a robot. And then it is the robot which has to be fed through all these technological innovation that he is able to give a medicine, give support to an old person in case he wants to move from place A to place B. So I think it is coming. Yeah. We just have to make sure that we are prepared, or whether not prepared, actually leading in innovations like this. So it is what is happening. I mean, that was a very, very interesting discussion. And one comment they made that don't make mistakes in 5G, we'll have to grow up and fix those. So those kids are really different. They are very different, and I think they will build on what is being done today.
Talking about robots in MWC, I've seen several Chinese or Japanese folks just cuddling a robot and walking around. So we are not seeing just IQ in robots, but EQ as well. So that is very important for taking care of elderly, right? So yeah, and you will need low latency network to power those, right? So yeah, absolutely. Another last topic which I want to touch upon is very close to your heart, which you mentioned in the presentation, is about security. So how are we placed in terms of security, end-to-end security? What role do you play beyond network level security in device level security as well? Do you have any influence on that?
Yes, I think whatever we are doing today in operators is securing our networks, and mainly it ends up securing your core networks. It could be your billing, your core, and your key establishments from a denial of service attack or any kind of vulnerable attacks. But I think what the problem we're going to be thrown at is that even a single device can be a rogue device and can cause a problem, because you're giving him a very high speed, low latency, and then monitoring so many things which will do. So I think 5G, one, the technology and the use cases is a challenge. In my view, the 5G security angle is a completely different vertical where we have to work. So it can be right from the app in your phone, which could be causing a security issue. It could be the firmware or the OS of a phone. It could be the network. It could be all the connected networks which can be used once you are on connected. If you don't build the right kind of layering strategy of stopping any kind of unwanted access, it can really cause a lot of problems. And imagine if the connected world, everything works in a connected world, so there is no manual override, it can really play a lot of havoc in this thing. So while we are very excited about the opportunities these new technologies give, I think it is the duty of us telcos and our OEM partners and our application partners and our device partners to come together to make sure that whatever we're making is secure. Because once it is all connected world, then we have to make sure it does what it's supposed to do and doesn't do what it's not supposed to do. So I think it is not a standard today that you just follow this standard, you will be secure. I think it's a developing thing, because as the threats are developing, the mitigations are developing. But I think this is something which is very, very important subject, and as stakeholders in this ecosystem, we must pay a lot of attention to it.
One follow-up, and maybe you can also share your thoughts on the same. So smartphones are fine, but now we are also going to connect a lot of IoT devices,
yes,
right? And the threat level could be, as you said, could be enormous on that. And the SLAs are pretty high on those type of devices. So like in US or other markets, you see carrier certifying devices. So we have not reached that stage because India is a more open market with smartphones. But do we see a certification program from operators to certify a particular IoT device in future?
In our lab, we do a lot of testing about the devices which customers use. But I think on IoT, if we sell an IoT device, we certify. But I think the markets like Asia, where you will get a cheap $1 or a $5 device, it could be a lamp which comes and off by sheer light, and it will have a username password as 123. And all these devices are, once they are connected, they are capable of communicating with the network. So I think, I don't know, in my personal view, not Airtel view, is that certifying all the devices which the customer will buy and put online would be a mammoth task, especially for a market of the size of Asia. What we'll have to do is protect them at the edge of the network. Okay. So if you find that that device is not behaving the way it should behave, you should have curtailing capabilities at the edge itself before it is able to come inside your network and you are bringing it in and then mitigating that. So I think that is the architecture we are working on, where these so-called rogue devices can be held at the edge rather than bringing it all the way in. But I think certification of, because IoT can work in a lamp, in your smart speaker, it could be anything, your watch.
There could be some mission critical devices which should go through certification, operator certification.
I think the devices which will do, like the robot which will take care of old people should definitely be certified, because it is taking care of a human being. But once this IoT will hit, any human being, they say, will have 10 connected devices at a given moment of time. And the house will have probably 100, right from your refrigerator to your washing machine to everything. So I think maybe at industry level, it's a good point we can discuss, where maybe at the chipset level, we have chipset people here, and where chipset level, at least some basic things can be built in to secure the devices. But yes, it is an industry question, and we all must pay attention to it.
So I think Randeep's covered quite a bit of ground on security. I would say typically in any telco organization, security is one area that is done as an afterthought. It happens generally at the end of a project, not at the beginning of the project. And in the world that we live in, that's just not going to work. So within Vodafone, we have made changes in the last few years whereby security is actually identified upfront in the project. All our suppliers are asked to have a security SPOC for the project, for the implementation, because it is amazing how many people use password as password and 1, 2, 3, 4 as password when they're configuring your network and when they leave. So all of that is just basic hygiene stuff that matters so much in the basic security of the network, which often gets overlooked. So the 4 Ps we follow: people, first of all, make them aware, give them right training, make sure there are proper procedures to control security. Second P, which is process. Third is policy. And the fourth is the platform itself. It is amazing. So many network vendors today do not do regular patches of security on their software. And they're using in their OSS system or even in their main platform sometimes some of the same operating systems that are used on your computers. So you will find that the computer has got much later generation security patch than what is running in some of your OSS systems. So you really need to look at it holistically. And we look at the 4 Ps there. The additional aspect on security, which is how can we actually make sure security goes into the end user services, which may be riding on top of our network. However, today, when people have a problem with their phone, they still call the network operator. I suspect when people have a problem with their IoT things, they will be calling the operator as well. So there is an expectation that you will serve them well. So how are you prepared for that? So I think you need to think about that. I think it's also an additional opportunity in terms of revenue generation, security as a service, and that's something that, again, Vodafone, Vodafone Idea, we've been looking at it quite keenly. So I think security is both a threat and an opportunity, but it requires a lot of work, and it requires you to really look at the whole thing holistically.
Rajan, Yeah, so just building on the thoughts of what Mr. Randeep and Vishant said, if we look at 5G, the security needs to be built in several layers, starting from standards, equipment, deployment, operations, and application. So standards, 3GPP and many other standardization bodies, they are actually working on to make 5G more secure than any of the existing technologies. On the equipment layer, equipment vendors like Huawei, we are working on making the equipment secure. Then comes deployment and operation, where we as vendor also work with our customers and make sure that deployment and operations are secure. Last but not the least is application, of course, where application vendors come in play, and they have their own security framework. So these are different layers at which security work in a 5G network. That is what we expect. Additionally, I also want to just share one thought. We discuss about URLLC as a future service. When it comes to URLLC, given that it will be SLA driven, actually quality will also become another aspect of security. For example, if your SLAs are not met and some accident happen or the application crashes, I mean, given that those are critical services, so we also need to think from that perspective that lack of quality can lead to lack of security from that kind of critical services perspective.
Any views on security?
You know, I'd just like to take a quick poll. I'm sure just about everybody here has a smartphone. I'd just like to ask a question. How many of you have an installed firewall/antivirus software installed on your smartphone? Please raise your hand. I rest my case. There's about 5 people in this whole room, of how many, I don't know, who have installed antivirus software or a firewall on your phone, and you carry in your pocket, a fairly sophisticated, what was a laptop or a desktop before, which is all hooked into our networks, right? Which is the first point of vulnerability for us, right? Most recently, there was a denial of service. And what was the denial of service? All these guys did was sniff the internet for IP, public IP, all right? Looked at every device that was using an IP, and then did an AI and said, show me all of those devices that are using a public IP that have any one of these passwords. You know, the 1, 2, 3, 4. They did an AI which said, here's the top 20 commonly used, and shut down one of the leading online applications.
Thank you very much.